Hi all, I'm Mark Mayfield. I'm the editorial advisor with student media here at the University of Alabama, and I'll be transitioning over in August, just in a few weeks, to the faculty at the Department of Journalism and Creative Media, where I have taught classes as an adjunct for a few years, but will be full-time with the faculty there coming up. Those of you in you're all in high school, I hope you'll consider coming to our program, coming to the University of Alabama. And we have a great journalism and media program here. But also there are other great programs in our region and state and elsewhere, and we support them all. So just happy that you're interested in media, and also very happy that you're interested today in magazine and feature writing. So we're going to talk about that. Much of my career was spent in the magazine industry. I love magazines, have my entire life practically. But I began actually in news journalism, was undergraduate here at UA, went from here to the Birmingham News, and then later on to 10 years with USA Today. And from there transitioned into the magazine world and became editor-in-chief of 4 magazines, including Art and Antiques, Southern Accents, out to Iowa with Traditional Home, and then to New York with House Beautiful as editor-in-chief of House Beautiful magazine. So I love magazines. I also have a news background, as I said, so I also love news journalism as well. And so hopefully these will be career paths that you'll consider. And again, we'd be happy to have you here. It's also thrilling to be part of the summer camp for ASPA. I think Meredith Cummings and her group are calling this the long weekend, or maybe the really long weekend this summer because of COVID-19 and having to do all this remotely. But it also gives a wonderful opportunity for those of us to speak over a long period of time here during the summer with you. So happy to do that. And I'm going to talk today about feature writing. And, magazine feature writing is very similar to, if you have a student magazine there at your high school, I'm hoping that you're working for them. If you're interested in feature writing, you really should be doing that. But also for your student newspaper, if you don't have a student magazine, certainly you can still write features for student newspapers. And when I was editor-in-chief of magazines, I often found that those who came from the newspaper world in terms of feature writing for magazines tended to be more accurate, tended to be able to research things really well, because that's sort of the training you get in newspapers. And it doesn't matter what kind of journalism it is or what the platform in terms of journalism it is. It's all the same in terms of always trying to be accurate, trying to be fair, trying to do really good research, making certain that you're covering all the bases in terms of good, strong journalism. So we're going to talk about some of that today, and let's get into it a little bit. First, I want to talk just generally about the state of magazines, because obviously I don't know what magazines you're reading, but I will tell you this, the magazine, there are jobs out in magazine world today. We all know a lot about the sort of the collapse of the print industry as advancing technology in the digital world has taken over. But there's still some great magazines, coming up. There's still magazine launches. There have been a lot of magazines that have folded during this time of transition, but also there have been a lot of new magazines. Here's a slide of one of the newest. It's called Sweet July with Aisha Curry. And this is a magazine that's called Sweet July because she was married in July. Her 3 children were born in July. And July itself is a celebration month for her, and her vision for this magazine was that celebration should be year-round. So Meredith, which is I think the largest magazine company now in the U.S., and a company I had worked for back when I was editor-in-chief of Traditional Home, has launched this magazine, and I think it's going to be really successful, and it's exciting. So there's a lot of launches going on. One of the things that's happening in magazines now, though, is the magazines that are succeeding. The big general interest magazines are having a rougher time of it these days. It used to be that magazines like Time and Newsweek, in terms of news, were really powerful, and although they're still around, I think that, and certainly Time is around. Newsweek, I think had folded at one point, has come back in a platform, but they don't have sort of the clout I think that they used to. They still do good journalism, of course, but But the thing about magazines, the ones, what the trend we're seeing out there now are really niche magazines, magazines that have sort of a defined audience that do not try to be so general interest. This is one of the more fun ones that was launched last year, and a lot of folks thought this was the best magazine launch of 2019. But this magazine is targeted for female skateboarders. And one of the main reason this happened, I believe, is the founder, Rob Hewitt, his daughter, young daughter was interested in skateboarding, and they were going to these skateboarding stores, and they just thought it looked very male dominated. And that from the product end, from the marketing end, from all of these things. So this was the outcome, that they decided to go start a women's skateboarding magazine. And it's been very popular and doing very well. So magazines are out there, but as I said, also where you are in your high school, you should be writing. If you want to write features, then you can do that for the student newspaper. And again, even better if you have a student magazine, but you can do that where you are now. There's also, of course, with the internet, with the web, with social media, with all kinds of different mobile platforms, all of these things, there's all sorts of opportunities for you to write. And if you want to become a writer, the simple thing for me to tell you, the most basic thing I can absolutely tell you is writers write. You have to get out there and write. And if no one will listen to you, if no one will give you a writing assignment, just do it on your own and do that. You know, one of the ways that I began as a writer eons ago was I just started writing sports stories. I was a big Bama football fan as a kid here, growing up in Alabama, and you know, I was just a kid, but I started writing just sort of game stories after games. I would just write them, and my dad says that he used to see me writing them in pencil and then just throwing them away. And I would do that because I just sort of loved to sort of imitate what I would see in the Birmingham News the next morning. And there was no internet in those days, so the next morning's newspaper after a big Saturday of football would be very much in demand. And as a kid, I was very interested in that. So that's sort of where my own writing experience comes in. But it also led to other things, and that was sports, but it began to lead to all sorts of ideas about things that I wanted to write about, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. But also I want to mention this. Here at UA, we have this wonderful magazine called Alice. It's a women's, collegiate women's fashion and lifestyle magazine. It's been very successful for us. It's won a national award, a Pacemaker Award, which is signifies the top magazine in the country. And it's done really, really well. So it's been one of the, and they give several pacemakers to magazines, but they're very selective about this, from the Associated Collegiate Press, and Alice has won one. So it's been a really great magazine, doing well, has a wonderful staff. One of the things we try to do, I'm their advisor, but this is absolutely a collegiate women's magazine run by college women, and they're doing a great job. Alice is very fashion lifestyle oriented, but it also has very issue oriented stories in it. In fact, one of the stories that won a national award right in the very first issue 5 years ago was a story called "Show Me the Money," which was about the pay gap between women and men, and how women could overcome this pay gap, which is unfair. And so that's how the students wrote about that, interviewing professors, interviewing other experts in the financial world as well, and it won an award. So it was great for the magazine, but also really something that college women could relate to. So the magazine deals with very weighty issues like that, but it also deals with more culture, lifestyle, sort of wonderful issues that come along. So they're having a great time doing that. Here's some of the just some layouts I threw together here from the last issue of Alice magazine, just to give you kind of an idea of the editorial content within the magazine. But they do a great job. They're very talented, and we think that it actually, for those wanting to go into the magazine industry as a career choice, I really think that this gives these students the experience that they need to do that. because it's not just writing, it's also learning how to design pages, it's learning how to take photography, not only in terms of exterior photography, but learning how to take photos in studio. For instance, Alice shoots products in studio that the magazine wants to feature in each issue. So those are the things we do with Alice, but it's a great learning opportunity in terms of writing, design, photography, video, all those things, from the digital end as well. Also, we're really excited. We're just announcing this new magazine. It's going to start this fall. It's a digital magazine that will begin in September, called 1956. And it's named 1956 because that was the year, as it says in this graphic, the year that Autherine Lucy officially enrolled at the University of Alabama as the first Black student at the University of Alabama. She, was very she had a tough time over there. It was I think she was only on campus for a few days, unfortunately. And later, James Hood and Vivian Malone in 1963 were also, so that Autherine was the first Black student, but Vivian Malone and James Hood came here in 1963 to the university and desegregated the university at that point. But Autherine Lucy was the first, and so this magazine is named in her honor, and we're really, really excited about this and the launch. And I can tell you there's a lot of enthusiasm over this magazine. So we'll be talking more about that as we go through the fall, as this magazine launches in digital format. So I want to talk just a little bit about this. Magazines, to me, are not just the pages they're printing on or the website that they're published on or the ebook that they may be formatted in or digital copy. What they are adventure books. It's about adventures. It's not really about, the way to think about magazines, and especially if you're going to write for magazines, the way to think about this is that this is a great adventure. Because it's unlike anything else. As I often say, it'll take you to places that you could never go without the magazine. This is a story that I did. I spent a couple of weeks in Provence retracing Vincent van Gogh's life in Provence. He painted 400 pictures there. And we went back, and a photographer and I sort of retraced his time in Provence we literally went to places where he put his easel and his canvas and would sit all day painting, whether it was in a sunflower field, a wheat field, here's an olive grove. And we would, we'd look at what he did, talk to curators there in the south of France, and just had a wonderful time retracing it. This was one of those great adventures I'm talking about. And it was fun. This story ran over about 10 pages and included images of the paintings themselves, and also images of what the scene looks like today in terms of real terms. So it was really wonderful. And this, magazines can take you anywhere. It's not that you all, I love going to Europe on some of these stories. I love going anywhere in the world on magazine stories, and was blessed to be able to do that. But it's not just about that. You can find great stories practically in your backyard. You can find them anywhere. You can find them at your high school. Right now, of course, we're all working and going remotely, and I know the plans are still a little bit up in the air in terms of whether you'll be back in classroom this fall and all that. But you can find stories wherever you are. And I always tell students here on campus at UA, go interview people in person, go sit down with them and get to know them, and don't just do it by email, don't just do it by phone. But right now, given COVID-19, you do what you have to do. And one of those things is you can interview people remotely, as we're talking right here. You can do this and interview them, whether it's Zoom or some other video streaming service, or whether it's by phone or whatever you have to do. We all sort of end up doing what we've got to do during COVID-19. But the basic premise is the same. It is an adventure. It should be fun to do this. Now, not every story is about fun. It's not, and we're going to talk about it in a second, but not everything is about that. They're very serious stories. But in terms of your life and your career, this is just a great thing to be able to do. magazines have taken me, as I said, to places I never could have gone without them. Just a couple of pictures, a lot younger days there. That's in Venice, the top photo, and in Provence in the bottom photo, at a place called the Pont de Gogh, which was an aqueduct, an old Roman aqueduct that came through the south of in the south of France there. Closer to home, magazines, as I said earlier, can have the same magic. They can have the same magic. Those stories are everywhere. This is one I did once on Southern photography, a story based on an exhibition that was at the Birmingham Museum of Art. But I really wanted to get into this, and obviously a story like that is also about is really about the images and the writer and the photographer, and sometimes that's the same person, sometimes it's not, but they need to work together on these stories. We always really insist in terms of the magazines here that the writer and photographer go together on these things when they can, in terms of stories like this. This is another one I just did because I still love to write and I do all sorts of things, but this was on a few years ago now on the talking to the crew, the last Hubble space shuttle mission, STS-125, which was not the last shuttle mission, but it was the last mission to repair the Hubble Space Telescope. They had done some repairs on it in earlier missions, but this was the last one in a really major mission that was dangerous as well. I think had some risk to it, but they did a wonderful job. Interviewed Elon Musk, but this has been, again, several years ago. He's a little harder to get to now. He's much more famous now, but everything he told me in this interview, and this went on for several pages, everything he told me in this interview has now basically come true, in terms of he was going to, NASA had just given him a contract to go to the resupply missions to the space station, uncrewed missions, but then he said he would begin to do crewed missions, human flight, and that's what he did, and that's what he, as you've been following that, they just launched a couple of astronauts to the space station here a few weeks ago. Story I did just on, and it's not about me, I promise we're going to talk about writing here, but just in terms of what I mean about this is you keep writing. If you're a writer, you keep writing, and I keep doing that even though I have a day job here, but I still love to write on a freelance level. This is about security and Hollywood stars and what they have to go through in terms of security. Also written books, these are a few of them. But overall, the bottom line is this, and this is the message I want to leave with you as well today. After all, who are we? And we're storytellers. That's what we are. No matter the format, no matter if it's in print, if it's online, if it's, if you're doing if you're just doing a thread on Twitter, and you're telling a story, we're storytellers. That's what we want to do. We want to find great stories and we want to tell them. But we want to tell them well, and let's talk a little bit about that. A few tips, first of all, for feature writing. And one of the first ones, and I can't stress this strongly enough, start with a strong narrative in your stories, always. Your lead should go from specific to general. Give us a sense of place from the start. What I mean by specific to general is start in one place, whether it's in, wherever, what you should do. Let's say you're interviewing a high school athlete. One of the great things is to do that interview outside of the football set. Let's say if it's a football player, outside of the football setting. Get them sort of out of their element, go visit with them, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's outside, and like here at UA, I always tell people it's great, go interview people out on the quad here at UA, that kind of thing. Get some sense of place into this thing and start the story there. And I'll show you an example of that in a second, but start the story and put us as the reader, as we're reading it, put us there with you in place. And if you're on the quad, for instance, or whatever expanse of space you have, let's say at your high school, on your high school campus, and you're interviewing someone, put us there with you. What's it, don't over describe it, but put us there with you as you're talking to them. Don't try to tell the whole story in the first paragraph. Remember, start off with a sense of place, start off from a specific sort of anecdote, and then go into the general area as you go from there. Focus on a person in terms of beginning this thing. Focus on a person, a scene, or event that illustrates the main point of the story. But again, now you probably learned in journalism classes already in high school that there's this thing called the inverted pyramid for news stories. You want to put all the news at the very top of the story, and the less important things lower down in the story. That's a news story. You absolutely want to tell the news. And if you're covering a speech, for instance, you don't want to say in the lead of that story that somebody gave a speech. That's not a news lead. You want to tell us what they said in the speech from the very beginning of that lead. But we're talking about feature writing here, and it's completely different. You don't want to summarize everything in the first few paragraphs of this. Think about it as a story you begin to tell. You want to tell it well. You want to get people interested from the first sentence. But you're going to, this is longer form journalism, and you're going to be able to weave that story through a longer sort of length of story. And that's what you're trying to do in great feature writing. You're trying to tell us a story, but you're not telling us all of that story in the beginning. Support the lead with a great quote or two. I always say this, think about a novel. And if you're reading a great novel that you like, and by the way, you should read novels. We're talking about nonfiction here, but you should absolutely read novels, good ones. But think about that. First of all, think about if you're looking at a novel, you pick up a book, think about, you'll turn to the first page. We all do this and look at the first line or two. Does it draw you into that story? It might not. A novel, if you don't like the beginning of if you look at it and you don't like the beginning of the book, you may just put it down and never read it. Same thing with a feature story. If the reader doesn't like the lead, if you don't compel them from the very first sentence in that lead, then they may just go past it and not read the story. But then after the beginning lead, you need a great quote or two. And when I said think about novels, think about a novel that didn't have dialogue. It'd be a pretty boring novel, right? I mean, think about that. You have to support, quotes are the lifeblood of our feature stories. You have to have good quotes. And so really, this sounds very formulaic, but try to get the lead up into the second paragraph, third paragraph, whatever. I always say, don't lead your story with a quote unless it's from God, unless it's a fantastic quote. But this is not an English essay. You're not summarizing with a quote in the lead, but you do need a strong quote after you sort of give us this quick narrative sort of beginning to the story. And by the way, when I say lead, I'm talking about the beginning. I'm literally talking about the first paragraph or just the first couple of paragraphs. Give us the full context of the story between the fourth and seventh paragraphs. We call this the nut graph. So let's say, I told some students here the other day, like if there's an athlete and let's say it's Tua Tagovailoa, who was the quarterback here, and you walking across the quad with him and you're interviewing him. You're gonna, from the very beginning, you're gonna talk about on the quad with Tua Tagovailoa. You're gonna say, I don't know, whatever is going on, you're gonna kind of walk us with it and put us in that walk with you. And you're not gonna say everything there is to know about him. You're not gonna talk about he's the quarterback at the University of Alabama, or he was, and he did this, and he did this, and he did this. Where that context is, where you're going to put in that background on him, you'll begin to put that in say, between the fourth and seventh paragraph. And all rules are made to be broken. Sometimes it'll be earlier than that. Sometimes it'll be later than that. But what I'm saying is you don't want that in the lead. You're not going to tell us from the very lead, you're not going to put all this data and all this background on whether it's Tua or whether it's another person you're interviewing. You're not going to put all the background in the first couple of paragraphs. You're just going to lead with putting us in that putting us in that place with you in the beginning, and you're going to weave that through. Again, that's different than a news story. You're not, like if you were covering a game with Tua Tagovailoa, you're going to talk about who won the game in the first paragraph and all that. It's a news story. It's a sports story, but it's also a sports news story. That's different than a feature story, and you're not going to tell us everything in the beginning. Spend the next part of the story after the nut graph. Spend the next part of the story expanding on the topic using your research and quotes from interviews. Again, remember, don't throw all the data up in the beginning of the story. You're going to kind of layer that in as you go through, but you do need good data. You do need good research. You need to attribute things that you don't know for certain. You know, if you don't need to attribute if it's fall and the leaves are turning color, you're the eyewitness. You can say that matter of factly. You don't have to attribute that. But if you're talking about you know, a car accident, or you're talking about something where you were not there, and you have to rely on whether it's public officials, whether it's eyewitnesses, whatever it is, you have to attribute that to them. So you do need to attribute every fact to, particularly when you're talking about data, you need to attribute where the source of that data comes from so that the reader can decide how credible that information is. And unlike news stories, you know, you're going to want what I call it the kicker, really, but it's really the end of the story. Your story should have an ending. You've got to have an ending to the story. Unlike a news story, which can just, you know, remember that the inverted pyramid and the most important stuff's at the beginning, and the very last couple of graphs could actually be cut, and readers wouldn't really miss anything. But in a feature story, you have to have an ending to the story. Think about a novel. What if a novel didn't have an ending? You'd be very disappointed if you got to the last chapter and there's no ending, right? Now, again, this is nonfiction. We're not writing fiction here. We're writing nonfiction, but it's the same idea. You want an ending. So let's say you began on the quad with that story, with whatever person you're interviewing. You began with them. One great thing would be to talk, you know, weave through the entire story, and then at the end, bring us back to that point. And bring us back to the quad or wherever you're interviewing that person. If it's in their office, bring us back to their office. If it's in a church, bring us back to the church. Wherever the setting is that you began in that very narrative strong lead, bring us back to that spot at the end. That's one great way to do this. And also have a strong quote to support that ending. Sometimes the quote can actually literally be the last paragraph if it's a really strong quote. But if not, at least get a good strong quote to, again, give us the dialogue, give us that lifeblood of personality into the story at that point. And as I say, give us a sense of place from the beginning. I'm going to talk just about now, all these things I've talked about, I want to give you a good example of it. One of the best stories I've ever read, and again, this is a sports story with about Leonard Fournette, but it's also just great feature writing, no matter whether it's sports or lifestyle, whatever it is, whether it was kind of a news analysis, but you know, it's a great feature written by a guy named Wright Thompson for ESPN, the magazine. And Leonard Fournette, just really quickly, was a running back for, some of you probably know this, running back for LSU. And he was the runaway Heisman Trophy candidate in the beginning of this particular year. He just was hands down that he was the hottest athlete in college football in terms of publicity. He really was just, he ultimately did not win the Heisman Trophy. Derrick Henry here at Alabama won the Heisman Trophy that year, largely because Alabama was the one team that stopped Leonard Fournette all year and kept him to something like 31 yards or something the entire game. But when this story was written, it was in the middle of his ascendancy in terms of, or his candidacy for the Heisman Trophy. And so here's the way that Wright Thompson began that story. And you probably can't read it on the screen here, but I will, I've got it here and I'll read this to you. Read it to you, really, but it starts where his, you know, the writer Wright Thompson is starting again, giving that sense of place right in the beginning with Leonard Fournette and where he is right after a football game, and you can read this yourself, but I'll just quickly go over it. It says his teammates leave. This is the very lead of the story. His teammates leave through the locker room doors at the end of Tiger Stadium, but Leonard Fournette waits for a state trooper and a campus police officer to escort him out alone. His sudden fame is always separating him from someone or something, one of the casualties of the mania that has settled over Baton Rouge. A crowd is gathered wanting an autograph, a picture, a touch, and if he exits with the rest of the Tigers, he might not get home for hours. The trooper goes first, a bull of a man named Brian Madden, all biceps and pecs, himself an offensive lineman for LSU 23 years ago. His day job is working security detail for Governor Bobby Jindal's family. Everything from his shaved head to his holstered Glock says, "Try me." They walk out through the tunnel in the opposite direction of Fournette's departing teammates. An hour after the South Carolina game, the Stadium Bowl is empty. Fournette. It goes on. And later, right, by the way, it gets to the nut graph here in another couple of graphs. Notice what he didn't do in this story. He didn't talk about in the beginning. He just said, he gives us the place right there at the north end of Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge, and he says Leonard Fournette. But he doesn't tell us all the background on Leonard Fournette in the beginning. He's weaving a story, much like a great novel would, again, except this is nonfiction. And he begins to do that. That's what I mean about going from specific. The specific thing is Fournette coming out of Tiger Stadium, but having to have an escort out by himself, coming out alone, because people are just mobbing him. They want his autograph. He's so popular, and that's, and we have athletes here in the state of Alabama just like this. That's what happens, and he had an escort coming out. So it puts us in that place. And later, it's going to weave this whole story about Leonard Fournette. It's going to talk to his family, all these things, talk to the people in college football around the country, what they think about him, all sorts of things. It's going to go on and on. But in the beginning, it's just going to be that one spot right there coming out of the stadium at the end. Now, that's one great story. There are other stories waiting to be told everywhere. Some are wild, crazy fun. Some are just, some, as I said earlier, are very serious, some often poignant, and some require more research than others. A great investigative story can also be a feature story. It may have a news element to it. It may be a news feature, but it can still be, and it's not breaking news in terms of that. Breaking news would be a news story, but an investigative story, which we have students working on stories like that here at UA all the time, and it also can go into more of a feature format. Students here at the Crimson White did this story a few years ago about some unsolved murders on campus. But again, it was a lead where this was back in the 1970s when this murder took place. So this was not something where they could be there the day after this happened. They weren't doing a news story. This is decades later. So they don't have they're not right in there in terms of sense of place, but they did a great job. Lauren Ferguson and Andy McWhorter were the writers of the story, the two student writers. And they told us from the beginning there, put us sort of on April 22nd, 1973, which was Easter morning, and they found the student's body. And it's just a horrific story, and it's never been solved. And so they went through this, and they started to weave this story, but they did a great job of reporting. You can see the page 1 of the Crimson White here, but this jumped inside and I think went for 3 pages total in the newspaper. In terms of, this was really investigative work, and they interviewed police. They went back into old files. They did all these things. Got a picture or two. That's a picture of the road. The victim's body was found along that road. A grisly story, but also one that needs to be told, because she shouldn't be forgotten. And there was another unsolved murder that they dealt with in this story as well. But then on a far lighter note, there are great stories everywhere. This is Carlos, who's an alligator, who is actually in the biology building here at UA. There's literally an alligator living there named Carlos. And the writer, this was for for the Honors College magazine, Mosaic. And the writer went to the office of the professor who studies this alligator and studies, his office is in the biology building, but it begins in his office. But there's something different about his office, and an alligator is going to walk into his office. So the writer goes into this and tells us and puts us in that spot in Dr. Stephen Secor's office, as you can see there. It says, I won't read it all, but it just says, Saturday morning, Dr. Stephen Secor sat in his office grading tests when he heard a clicking sound outside his door. He looked up only to see his pet Carlos lumber through the door. Plenty of people have pets. Some even bring them along to work. But Secor's pet is a bit different. Carlos is an alligator, quietly living on the 4th floor of the biology building, unknown to many of the students who sit in class below him. It's wonderful. It's a great lead. And that, again, that is specific. It's going to go to general as to why this alligator is in the biology building, what kind of research Dr. Secor is doing. That's the general part. But the specific part is the alligator walking into Dr. Secor's office, which is really cool. By the way, the photographer, I talked to her, is sort of like you know, she was a little worried about the alligator, but she hung in there and did a great job. But I'm not sure I would volunteer to go take a picture of an alligator in an office like that. So that's really cool. Sounds like a no-brainer, but you can learn a lot from books. I'm going to just read you a few little quick things, but a great writer reads a lot. You need to do that. You need to read books as well in terms of your feature writing. I won't read every word on this, but this is a story. Again, this is a lead of a feature. This could be a lead of a feature story, and there have been features written. Richard Yates is a writer who wrote this incredible book called Revolutionary Road that was made into a movie. Long after his death. Yates, his last 2 years were here at the University of Alabama. He was in poor health. But he, I think Revolutionary Road, which is a really tough book. It's a book about the breakup of it's a novel. It's about the breakup of a marriage, but it's kind of tough to read, but the writing is unbelievably wonderful. And Yates was here teaching creative writing at UA, but this is when he first came here it describes how Yates was taken off the plane, and he looked so bad they expected him to die immediately. And this is from a book by Blake Bailey, a biography of Richard Yates, and this is the way that begins. Another one, Dead Wake, which is a pretty popular book about the sinking of the Lusitania, the RMS Lusitania, and he leads us in this in terms of the approach. And in the night before this ship was sunk by a torpedo by a German U-boat, the tension that sort of gripped the ship itself. And here's an example of that. And again, I won't go fully into that, but you can read that. But it describes the captain of the ship going down to the first class lounge where there was a concert and a talent show going on, but everybody tensed up a little bit when the captain walked in. And frankly, the captain was doing his best to put a good face on it, but he was bringing some really bad news, and that is that there had been U-boats spotted in the area. Very controversial in terms of the sinking of that ship. But the ship sank the next day after being hit by a torpedo from one of those U-boats. This is Ava's man. Rick Bragg teaches here at UA, and I would encourage you. He's one of the greatest writers in the country, and I would really encourage you if you do come to UA to college to take a writing course from Rick. Just a wonderful writer, and the way he, again, he's a storyteller. He's a fantastic storyteller, and I'll leave you with this. But he's talking about Ava here, and it's just incredible the way he begins in terms of how he tells this story. Again, not trying to tell it all. The other thing you got to be very careful about in your writing. And Rick is great. Rick has this real sense of place in his writing. I mean, that's an understatement about his writing, but he doesn't overburden it with adjectives. You know, he tells us specific. He's so descriptive and such a good writer, but he doesn't make it all flowery. He doesn't give us all these adjectives, adjective after adjective after adjective. He's very careful in his writing. It's just wonderfully, he spins a tale just so well, except this is nonfiction, and it's really good. Some writing I did on, one of my books here, just, I won't read all this, but what I did is, this was a book about Alabama football. I mean, you almost got to write a book about Alabama football at Alabama if you're a writer, but one thing I did before this, I wanted to know, Alabama the football team opened their season in 1892. And I'd read where it was in Birmingham. It wasn't in Tuscaloosa. So I looked that up, and in researching this book, I went and walked the area where they literally played their first football game in 1892. And it was on the south side of Birmingham, right at the foot of Red Mountain, in a place called Lakeview Park. It was the baseball field of Lakeview Park. Football was still brand new. In fact, there were only a couple of players on this team, this first Alabama team, who had ever even seen a football game. Certainly never played. The only couple of players who'd ever played in a football game, and they had transferred from other schools. There was a couple of them had come from the Northeast, from prep schools there. But most of the team had never even seen a football game. And the first one that they had practiced over a few weeks, but the first real game they'd ever seen was the one they played. And I wanted to walk, I just walked that area. I wanted to get some sense of place of that. And so and I began that. My lead on that says it began quietly enough on a November 1892 afternoon in Lakeview Park, a sprawling resort-like recreation area landscaped at the lower slope of Red Mountain on the southeast side of Birmingham, Alabama. 4 years earlier in 1888, President Grover Cleveland had briefly visited the same spot, stopping by the well-appointed Lakeview Hotel, which offered a rarity: running water in each of the guest rooms, and something far more rare than that, electric lights for its time. And so I wanted to place readers there first before I talked about the football game. And so that's what I did, but I'm telling a story. If that was a game story, completely different. I'd tell who won, who in the very beginning, who they played, all those sorts of things, but that was different. Another one of the greatest novels I've ever read. This is, again, now we're moving to fiction here, but Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. And I actually read passages in classes sometimes from this book because it's really so good. Just want you to take a quick look at that. But if you, again, this is a really, there's very serious parts in this novel. Some of it is really tough to read, but the descriptions that Pat Conroy gave in this novel are really stunning. And the sense of place is extraordinary. So in closing here, really, if your school has a magazine, be sure and sign up for that. We have Alice here. We're going to have the new magazine, 1956. In terms of, people ask me all the time about freelance assignments. You'll have more opportunity on this when you come to college. I just tell people, start small. Try to see if you have a campus magazine, that's wonderful, but write for your campus newspaper if you don't have a campus magazine, or better yet, write for both. A great feature story in a newspaper is just as good as a great feature story in a magazine. The elements are all the same. But if you do pitch a story somewhere else for your city magazine, or and particularly when you get to college and you're pitching stories to college magazines, make sure you know the magazine, what they cover and what they don't cover, and those sorts of things. Know the masthead. The masthead on the magazine is literally the staff. It's not, some people call the name of a newspaper on page one the masthead, but that's magazines. It's the staff page, basically. Learn who does what. Come up with the best idea you ever had and make sure it fits perfectly with the magazine's mission. The great ideas. When I was editor-in-chief, I loved getting great ideas. I didn't mind that at all. The other thing is this, you are old enough in school now to be very confident of yourself and your ideas. It doesn't mean you try to go tell everybody you know everything. I'm not talking about that, but be confident in yourself. If you come up with a great idea, tell people you think it's a great idea. It's fine. And you're not bothering people. Don't worry about bothering people. Ask for help. Ask people to read something for you if you're not sure about the lead. I do that all the time, even now with stuff I write. Ask them about that. Don't worry about asking. Don't worry about bothering people. Great writers bother people, okay? That's one of the things that's okay to do. But I'll tell you, most people don't mind being bothered. They I love to talk to young people. I love it when young people come up with great ideas. When I heard about the magazine, when the student who proposed this 1956 magazine sent me the first note, I just loved it. I said, I love the name. I love the idea. I love the proposal she was making. It was just it was thrilling. I didn't tell her, that hey, go back, you're not old enough to propose a magazine. Yes, she's old enough. Yes, she's creative enough. One of the other things is, if you think about it, the best novelists in the world, generally their first novel is their best novel, and a lot of them wrote their first novel in their 20s, and you're not far away from that. But you can write right now and be confident in what you do, and don't let anyone tell you that you don't know anything. Okay, be really confident. Find a teacher at your school, and I bet you already know a great teacher who really supports your writing, but find someone there who'll support your writing. Talk to your parents about it, everything, and be excited about it, because writing is a worthy profession. It's a wonderful thing. and make sure that you don't let anybody steer you away from it, that if it's something you really want to do. Now, one thing financially, it's tough, you know, in terms of writing, pay, that kind of thing down the road. But right now, you know, I do think many opportunities are now being created because of the different wonderful new online digital platforms coming up. But certainly magazines are able to tell stories now. A digital issue of a magazine, for instance, can have video as opposed to a print. You know, print's just a photo, right? But video, the magazine can literally just come alive to the reader online now. And a lot of magazines are now doing digital issues in addition to print issues as well, a lot of them. But it's the digital thing that's really exciting for magazines right now. So a lot of other things, you know, just know all these things about magazines. Normally magazines do have, or professional magazines have submission guidelines. But your student magazines may have that as well. And also when you're pitching a story and you're sending an email about it, and most people want emails now. You know, it used to be in my era, you know, you do snail mail, you know, just, but it's, most people want that, but use your writing skills. And you know, it's your idea, and you need to be able to describe that idea in just a couple of paragraphs very quickly. You know, people will just sort of turn something off if it doesn't grab them in the email right off the bat. The other thing I tell students is have an online portfolio, have a writing portfolio, so that you can put a link in emails and not have a lot of attachments that people are a little wary of opening, you know, because of viruses and computers and that kind of thing. So anyway, have a great writing portfolio online as you go through this. And ask someone to speak up for you. You know, it always matters. Always ask somebody to speak up for you. As I said, don't worry about somebody bothering you, okay, or that you're bothering somebody. Don't worry a bit about that. Just be confident in what you do. Don't bug everybody. Don't call people, you know, all the time in the hour, night, everywhere. Don't do all that. But definitely don't worry about asking people that you won't help. So, you know, I'm just, I'm a huge fan of magazines, huge fan of writing, but I'm really most of all a huge fan of great talent. I love young people that have such an energy and such an energy and such enthusiasm about this business. And so, you know, and also send me a note if you ever need any advice or anything. Send me a note. My email is msmayfield1@ua.edu. msmayfield1 at ua.edu, and I'm happy to talk with you about writing anytime you want to. It's why I'm here, and I do that with our students all the time, and I'm very optimistic about the future of journalism, of media, and it's because of people like you. So thanks so much. It's been great to be with you here, and I do hope that if you come to UA, be sure and come see us in journalism and creative media. We'll see you then. Take care.